Hey, folks. I am so excited to be here today and to talk to y'all about our experience dry farming here in Western Washington. I'm going to speed through a lot of stuff, so hopefully we'll have room for the questions at the end. Can we do next slide? So my name's Ansley Roberts. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the farm manager at 21 Acre Center for Local Food and Sustainable Living here in Woodinville, Washington. I first was around dry farming as a training program manager at Homeless Garden Project in Santa Cruz, California. So, moving to Western Washington was definitely a little bit of adapting to different conditions. One thing I think Lucas covered a lot of it really well in the beginning, so I'm going to probably skim over good bits of it. But one thing I will also say is I feel like the daylight conditions and the buffer seasons also really impacts our growing in those buffer seasons when we can get into the ground, especially for hot crops. I'm originally from the Southeast, so, not being able to get tomatoes in the ground until, late May is pretty crazy to me. Yeah, actually, can we go to the next slide? So at 21 Acres, we are an environmental education center. We're focused primarily on local food systems and green energy as solutions to climate change. We have 4 acres of farmland, and I would love to go into where the rest of those acres, those 21 acres are. But that list is long. So for the sake of time, we're just going to talk about the farm for now. A huge part of our farm is community. We have a really robust volunteer program that is incorporated all the way from planting the transplants in the ground to our produce distribution. We had about 60% of our produce went to different food access networks within the Puget Sound area last year. And we also, I think one of the really amazing things about our space is that we get to experiment a lot. And so that's really kind of how we stumbled into dry farming. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. For us, dry farming truly felt like a no-brainer. We take an agroecological approach to our farming, which means so many things. But for the context of dry farming, really hones in on working with the conditions you have instead of against them. I know that Washington is so famous for our rain, but we do have a pretty substantive drought cycle, roughly early July through September, though that's been really erratic in the last few years. And another huge piece of it for us is water conservation. A lot of the farms in our area draw their irrigation from rivers, and overconsumption of river water can lead to reduction in the level of that water, which can accelerate the rate at which that water is warming, which is really negative for a lot of our flora and fauna in those habitats, which includes our beloved salmon. And also for us, our farm is right on the edge of Woodinville, which is a suburb of Seattle. So we're actually on municipal water, and it is massively expensive to run 4-acre farm off of municipal water. And also, municipal water is energy intensive. So anywhere where we can conserve water is perfection. And also I get really excited about dry farming as a climate adapted practice as our environment is getting hotter and drier, and being able to kind of have dry farming as a tool in our toolkit to adapt to those conditions. Next slide, please. So this is a map of our site and our soils on the site. If you haven't had a chance to look at the USDA soils web survey for your site, highly recommend. It is really fun to dig into seeing where those lines are on your property, and then getting even more into it and literally taking out your little soil core and seeing what your soils look like. We primarily have silty loam on our site. That triangle at the bottom is Tukwila muck, which is more of a clay soil. And we have primarily dry farmed in that Tukwila muck soil. And it's definitely had the best conditions for that. Though we have farmed in our silty loam soils, one thing that we try to pay a lot of attention to though is, I mean, our soil cores are not as large as the ones you saw in the photos before, but you know, just like even 2 feet, understanding where that clay layer is, because parts of our property have a straight sand bottom under that silty loam, and then parts of our property have this beautiful clay underneath it, and parts of our property are retaining water longer. And that's really been helpful in where we're placing our dry farm crops. Next slide, please. So our kind of gateway into dry farming was dry farm tomatoes. I think it's a lot of folks' gateway. I think it's also as a tool for communicating to the public. It's a really great crop to talk about because especially with gardeners, it's known so much as a water hog. You can see, I think, or it's on your right, the dry farm tomatoes are longer root systems, and the irrigated are up to a foot shorter. And we've grown 2 different varieties of dry farm tomatoes, the tomato and the Dirty Girl tomato, which is bred by Dirty Girl Produce in Watsonville, California. So thanks, Joe. And we have really found that the Dirty Girl tomato is, for us, it's had a lot richer flavor, and we love it so much that we're actually saving seed from it, and hopefully adapting it to our kind of shorter growing season here in Washington. And I'm really excited to continue to experiment with that going forward. We also have had really bad issues with blossom end rot towards the end of our growing season, so I'm really excited to keep listening later. Next slide, please. This year we got to experiment with dry beans. Both of these varieties are from the Adaptive Seeds Dry Farming Institute collaboration. The Golden Dragon chickpeas became my favorite crop on campus this year. Just the plants are so cool. You can't really see it super well in this photo, but each of the leaves have these little hairs on them that really hold water, and so they're just gathering water from the air all season, and it's really amazing to walk through them in the morning, and they're like totally soaked. Also, we only grew 100 row feet, so we're not on a combine scale, but they stood at probably about 2.5 feet, and they were totally erect all season with no support, so I do think they would be good candidates for that. The only issue we had is we have a homemade bean thresher out of a 55-gallon drum, and I'm happy to share that YouTube link with anyone. And it didn't do a super great job of getting the chickpeas out of their hulls, I think just because they're tighter. So if anyone else has any resources for that, I would love to hear it. And then the Whipple beans were like a very humbling and big learning moment for us. It was in our loamier soils. It was way later in our planting plan than I had hoped to get it in the ground. It was drier. And we tilled and then didn't plant for 4 days later, until 4 days later. And the soil was so dry. It was so dry. And I really naively was like, they'll make it. And some of them did, but we had pretty huge yield loss. And it really taught me a big lesson about soil moisture at planting. Next slide, please. This was kind of a rogue experiment this year. We had our Hopi red dye amaranth planted in between our 2 varieties of dry farm tomatoes. And we also had another row that was irrigated, so it was really great to kind of compare and contrast. Definitely the plants, like the color was not as saturated. You can see in this picture, the leaves are kind of a tawny color, and in an irrigated, robust Hopi red dye plant, that those leaves are like deep burgundy. The plants were shorter. I do actually think that if you're doing dry flower production, they could still work really well because they're a little easier to work with. They're not as like thick and chunky, but probably not the best fit for cut flower production. Next slide, please. And then a big piece of dry farming for us is talking about the ecological impact, and how farming practices can really contribute to a positive environmental outcome. And we've done a few different events where we talk to people about dry farming because we've primarily grown that New Girl tomato. And, you know, next to a big, juicy, like multicolored heirloom might not be quite as exciting to a market customer. So really telling that story of the environmental impact, and also we always have a taste test because the flavor speaks for itself. It really does. And people get so excited about it, and how tasty it is. And we have people coming back for them. And we also got to have a really cool partnership with Washington Water Trust where they helped out with some marketing initiatives in our area. And definitely if you have a water conservation organization in your area, definitely reach out and see if they're interested in some kind of marketing partnership because you're farming. You don't necessarily have time to make like a really beautiful infographic. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna breeze through this super fast so I can have questions. We did the soil moisture lesson we did learn. And this is maybe a little bit of a spicy suggestion, and I know that it's also not accessible to everyone, but if you miss your time, your soil's super dry. We ended up pre-irrigating our dry farm tomatoes, like pre-irrigating the soil, planting, and then not touching it after them. And if you have the means to do it and you miss your mark, not all hope is lost. I know it's a little bit of a spicy suggestion, but and then get to know your soils. Luckily, the Dry Farming Institute has done this really amazing work of taking the guesswork out of the varieties. And, you know, just share the joy of dry farming with your customers. And for future experiments, I won't go through everything. I'll just say, I love doing experiments. I love hearing from folks and hearing what they want to experiment with. If there's a trial you want to collaborate on, if there's a trial you really want to do, but you don't have time, I'll put my email in the chat and folks, please reach out to me. I'd love to collaborate more. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ansley. We probably have time for one or two questions, and then we'll have another presentation before the break. I see Jacqueline said, how do you fertilize?
So we really don't fertilize much. We really don't fertilize differently than our irrigated crops. But we have really acidic soils, so we do have to lime, which is part of why we till. And so we lime and we use Nutri-Rich fertilizer and compost, and then we try to come through with probably like 10% of our overall fertility needs in liquid fertilizer that we spray on for the dry farm crops.
Someone says, how about biochar for helping with water retention? Tomoko.
I have no experience with biochar. So if other folks do have that experience and want to talk about it, I am open to hearing it, but I don't personally have experience with biochar.
Right, yeah. The OSU dry farming project has 1 year of experience with biochar, and it was mixed, but I think there's some promise for biochar for water retention, and I'll just leave it at that. I think that's all the time for questions we have, just because we need to keep moving on. So thank you very much, Ansley.
Thank you.